London, 1845. Wilhelmina Lockhart stood at her father's study window, watching raindrops trace mournful paths down the glass. The weather matched her spirits, grey, relentless, suffocating. Behind her, the family solicitor, Mr. Finch, shuffled papers with the unmistakable sound of a man delivering bad news. "I regret to inform you, Miss Lockhart, that your father's debts are considerably more extensive than previously believed." His voice was practiced in delivering disappointment. "Havenwood will be forfeit within the month unless the sum of £8,000 can be produced." Wilhelmina closed her eyes, her fingers gripping the windowsill until her knuckles whitened. Havenwood, the only home she had ever known, the estate her mother had loved until her dying day 3 years prior. Now, barely 6 months after her father's passing, it would be lost. "There must be something that can be done," she whispered, though she had already sold her mother's jewelry, dismissed half the staff, and reduced their household expenses to bare necessities. "There is one matter." Mr. Finch hesitated, adjusting his spectacles. "Your father left a sealed letter with specific instructions should this situation arise." Wilhelmina turned as the solicitor produced an envelope from his inner coat pocket. Her father's distinctive scrawl marked the front, "For my daughter, when all seems lost." With trembling fingers, she broke the seal and unfolded the parchment, her eyes scanning the contents with increasing disbelief. "My dearest Wilhelmina, if you are reading this, I have failed you most grievously. The gambling debts I accumulated in my despair after your mother's passing have likely come due. There remains one solution, though it pains me to suggest it. The Duke of Greymont still honors our agreement. He will settle all debts in exchange for your hand in marriage. He is a man of means and influence, if not warmth. A marriage of convenience, perhaps, but one that will preserve Havenwood and secure your future. Forgive me, my child. Your loving father." Wilhelmina crumpled onto the window seat, the letter falling from her grasp. "This cannot be. I've never even met this Duke." "The Duke of Greymont is a most formidable gentleman," Mr. Finch said carefully. "His Grace indicated the offer stands until month's end. And if I refuse, then Havenwood and everything in it will be auctioned to satisfy the creditors. You and your sister would have nothing." Wilhelmina's chest tightened. 16-year-old Charlotte, still recovering from consumption, needed stability and care. Without Havenwood, without means, what would become of them? "Marriage to a stranger," she murmured, "to save what father gambled away." She had always believed love was a luxury afforded only to those without responsibility. For women of her station, marriage was business, a transaction of property and bloodlines. But she had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that she might at least know the man who would become her husband. "I shall write to the Duke," she finally said, straightening her shoulders. "Tell him I accept his proposal." Mr. Finch's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Are you certain, Miss Lockhart?" "The Duke of Greymont has our reputation. What choice do I have? Charlotte needs Havenwood. I will do what is necessary." That evening, as Wilhelmina penned her acceptance to a man she had never met, she told herself this was merely duty. Love had no place in her future. A woman of sense knew better than to expect happiness in a marriage built on obligation. 3 days later, a black carriage bearing the Greymont crest arrived at Havenwood. Not the Duke himself, but his solicitor, a severe man named Mr. Caldwell, who brought marriage papers already prepared. The wedding would take place in 1 week at the Duke's London residence. All debts would be settled immediately. "His Grace regrets he cannot meet with you before the ceremony," Mr. Caldwell stated, his tone suggesting the Duke regretted nothing of the sort. "He is occupied with pressing business matters." "How convenient for His Grace," Wilhelmina replied, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Does he often acquire brides as one might purchase livestock? Mr. Caldwell remained impassive. The Duke's methods are his own, Miss Lockhart. He expects compliance with the terms. That evening, Charlotte found Wilhelmina in their mother's garden, staring unseeing at the withering roses. "You mustn't do this for me, Will," her sister pleaded, her thin face pinched with worry. "We could manage somehow. Become governesses, perhaps." Wilhelmina squeezed Charlotte's hand. "With your health?" "No, this is the only way. Besides, I'm 27. Long past my prime for the marriage market. I should consider myself fortunate that a duke would have me at all." "But they call him the Black Duke," Charlotte whispered. "The servants say he never goes into society, that he ruined 3 men who crossed him. Some whisper he caused his first wife's death." "Gossip and hearsay," Wilhelmina replied with more confidence than she felt. "Dukes always attract rumors." Yet that night, she scarcely slept, her mind conjuring images of a cruel, faceless man whose cold hands would claim her body and whose cold heart would imprison her soul. 1 week later, Wilhelmina stood in the Duke's cavernous London mansion, wearing her mother's refurbished wedding gown. No family attended save Charlotte. No friends had been invited. Only the necessary witnesses and a clergyman awaited in the drawing-room that felt more like a mausoleum than a home. "His Grace will join us momentarily," the butler announced. Wilhelmina's heart pounded against her ribs. This was madness. She was about to bind herself forever to a man she had never seen. The door opened, and the room fell silent. She had expected an older man, perhaps corpulent and jowly from excess. Instead, the figure who entered moved with a predator's fluid grace. Tall and broad-shouldered, the Duke of Greymont commanded the space without effort. His severe black attire contrasted sharply with his clean-shaven face and piercing blue eyes. Not handsome in the conventional sense, his features were too harsh, his expression too forbidding, but striking in a way that made it impossible to look elsewhere. Those cold eyes assessed her briefly before he nodded to the clergyman. "Let us proceed. I have appointments awaiting." Not a word of greeting. Not a courtesy. Just the cool efficiency of a man completing a business transaction. The ceremony passed in a blur. Wilhelmina spoke her vows mechanically, feeling as though she watched herself from a great distance. When the Duke slipped a ring onto her finger, a heavy gold band devoid of sentiment, his touch was brief and impersonal. "You are now the Duchess of Greymont," he stated after the clergyman pronounced them wed. "My steward will show you to your chambers. I have business in the city and will return this evening." With that, he turned to leave. "Your Grace," Wilhelmina called, finding her voice at last. "Might I at least know your Christian name? Since we are now husband and wife." He paused at the doorway, his profile severe against the light from the hallway. "James," he said after a moment's hesitation. "Though no one has used it in many years." Then he was gone, leaving Wilhelmina with a new title, a new home, and the crushing weight of a loveless marriage. The Duke's London house proved as austere as its master. Dark furniture, heavy curtains, and a noticeable absence of feminine touches created an atmosphere of masculine practicality rather than comfort. The servants moved quietly, efficiently, and with a wariness that spoke volumes about their employer. Mrs. Ellis, the housekeeper, showed Wilhelmina to her chambers, a suite of rooms separate from the Duke's. "His Grace values his privacy," the woman explained, her tone carefully neutral. "He dines at 8, though often in his study. The eastern wing is his personal domain and is not to be disturbed." "I see," Wilhelmina replied, wondering what manner of marriage this would be if she was expected to live as though her husband were merely a distant landlord. "And what are my duties as Duchess?" The housekeeper looked startled by the question. You are mistress of the household, Your Grace. You may make whatever changes you deem appropriate, though. She hesitated. Though what, Mrs. Ellis? His Grace prefers order and routine. Changes tend to displease him. That evening, Wilhelmina dined alone in the cavernous dining room, the empty chairs a stark reminder of her isolation. When a footman informed her that the Duke would not be joining her, she was unsurprised but none the less disappointed. She had hoped for some opportunity to understand the man to whom she was now bound. After dinner, restless and unable to settle in her unfamiliar surroundings, Wilhelmina wandered the corridors of her new home. The western gallery, lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, led her to a door she had not noticed earlier. It stood slightly ajar, revealing the warm glow of lamplight. Curious, she pushed it open to discover an extensive library. Floor-to-ceiling shelves housed thousands of volumes, while comfortable chairs and reading tables suggested this room, at least, was meant for use rather than show. A fire burned low in the grate, casting dancing shadows across the rich carpet. "You are lost, Duchess!" The deep voice startled her. In a shadowed corner, the Duke sat in a leather armchair, a book open on his lap and a glass of amber liquid at his elbow. His formal attire had been replaced by a white shirt, open at the collar, and dark trousers. "I apologize for the intrusion," she said, gathering her dignity. "I was merely exploring." "Now you have explored. You may go." His dismissal stung, awakening something rebellious in her nature. Instead of retreating, Wilhelmina stepped further into the room. "Is this how our marriage is to proceed? You issuing commands and me obeying without question?" The Duke's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, that she would challenge him. "Our arrangement is one of mutual benefit," he stated, closing his book. "You needed financial salvation. I required a duchess for reasons of my own. Affection and companionship were never part of the bargain. Yet we must coexist under the same roof. Surely some civility isn't too much to ask." For a long moment, he studied her, and Wilhelmina fought the urge to fidget under his scrutiny. "Very well," he finally said. "What would you have of me, Duchess? Mindless chatter over breakfast? Insincere compliments on your attire? I warn you, I have little patience for social niceties." "I would have honesty," she replied. "If we are to be married in name only, I should like to know the rules of this arrangement. What is expected of me?" The Duke rose, his height more imposing in the intimate space. "You will maintain this household. You will appear beside me at the few social functions I deem necessary. You will not pry into my business affairs or personal matters." He paused, his gaze hardening. "And you will produce an heir." The blunt statement sent heat rushing to Wilhelmina's cheeks. "I see. Do you?" He moved closer, and for the first time, she caught his scent, sandalwood and something darker, more elemental. "I purchased your family's debts, Duchess. I saved your precious Havenwood. In return, I expect compliance with my terms." Wilhelmina lifted her chin. "You speak as though you've acquired a possession rather than a wife." "Haven't I?" His mouth curved in a cold smile. "Society marriages are rarely more than business transactions dressed in sentiment. Ours simply dispenses with the pretense." She should have been cowed by his harshness, yet something in Wilhelmina refused to yield. "My name is Wilhelmina," she said quietly. "Not Duchess. Not wife. If we are to have any semblance of a marriage, you might at least acknowledge me as a person." For a heartbeat, something like respect flickered across his face before it settled back into its usual granite expression. "Wilhelmina, then," he said, her name sounding foreign on his lips. "Rest well. Tomorrow you will begin your duties as mistress of this house." With that, he retrieved his book and glass, then left her standing alone in the library, wondering what manner of man she had married and what secrets lay behind his forbidding exterior. The following weeks established a pattern. The Duke rarely appeared at breakfast, spending his mornings attending to business matters. Occasionally, Wilhelmina caught glimpses of men arriving for meetings, bankers, solicitors, and once, a hard-faced individual whose scarred knuckles and watchful eyes suggested a more dangerous profession. The servants, while respectful, maintained a careful distance. Only Mrs. Ellis proved somewhat forthcoming, revealing in carefully measured comments that the Duke had inherited his title at 23 after his father's sudden death, that he had been briefly married 5 years ago, and that his business acumen had doubled the family fortune. The first Duchess. Wilhelmina asked one afternoon as Mrs. Ellis helped arrange flowers in the drawing-room. What was she like? The housekeeper's hand stilled. Lady Caroline was very beautiful. Very young. Their marriage lasted barely a year before she hesitated. Before she passed. How did she die? It's not my place to say, Your Grace. Was it childbirth? Illness? Mrs. Ellis's expression closed like a shutter. His Grace does not permit discussion of the late Duchess. That evening, Wilhelmina confronted her husband in the library, where she had learned he spent most evenings. "Why did no one tell me you were a widower?" she demanded without preamble. The Duke looked up from his correspondence, his pen pausing mid-word. "You never asked." "I shouldn't have to ask for fundamental information about the man I've married. What happened to your first wife?" His expression darkened. "That subject is closed." "Was she ill?" "Did she? Enough." He slammed his hand on the desk, making the inkwell rattle. "My past is my own, Duchess. Do not test my patience by prying where you are not welcome." His vehemence only strengthened her suspicion that something sinister lurked in his past. That night, Wilhelmina lay awake in her bed, Charlotte's words echoing in her mind, some whisper he caused his first wife's death. The Duke had not yet exercised his marital rights, though his occasional intense glances suggested he had not forgotten that aspect of their arrangement. Wilhelmina found herself both dreading and curious about the prospect. How would those hard hands feel against her skin? Would there be any tenderness in him, or would the act be as coldly efficient as everything else he did? Her opportunity to discover more about her mysterious husband came unexpectedly. A fortnight after their wedding, an invitation arrived for Lady Harcourt's annual autumn ball, the most coveted event of the pre-season. "We shall decline," the Duke stated at dinner, the first meal they had shared in 3 days. "Might I ask why?" Wilhelmina ventured. "Lady Harcourt is my godmother. She would be hurt by my absence. I avoid such gatherings." "Is it because of what happened with Lord Pembroke's son?" The Duke's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. "What do you know of that?" Wilhelmina kept her expression neutral, though her heart raced at having struck a nerve. "Only rumors. Something about a duel that never took place because the young man fled to the continent. Gossip," he dismissed, though tension had entered his posture. "Nothing more." "Then there should be no reason to avoid society," she pressed. "As your Duchess, I have certain obligations. Your obligation is to me, not to the vultures who call themselves the Ton," he interrupted. "They will only seek to corrupt you against me with their lies." Wilhelmina considered her next words carefully. "If you wish me to disbelieve rumors, you must give me truth to replace them. Otherwise, how am I to know what to believe?" For a long moment, he studied her, as if assessing her motives. Then, with a sharp exhale, he set down his fork. "Very well." We shall attend for 1 hour, no more. And you will stay by my side throughout. Thank you, she said, surprised by this small victory. I shall order a new gown immediately. Unnecessary. I had Madame Beaumont prepare a suitable wardrobe for you weeks ago. The dresses should arrive tomorrow. Wilhelmina blinked in surprise. You arranged a wardrobe without consulting me on style or preference. You are a duchess now. Your attire should reflect your station. His tone brooked no argument. The blue gown will be appropriate for Lady Harcourt's affair. The fact that he had planned this aspect of her life so meticulously, without her input, both irritated and intrigued Wilhelmina. It suggested he had given more thought to his duchess than his cold demeanor indicated. The night of the ball arrived, and Wilhelmina found herself both excited and apprehensive. The blue gown was admittedly exquisite, a deep sapphire silk that complemented her fair complexion and auburn hair perfectly. The cut was fashionable yet modest, the quality undeniable. Paired with the Greymont diamonds, another surprise from the Duke, she looked every inch a duchess. When she descended the stairs, she found her husband waiting in the entrance hall, resplendent in formal black attire. For an instant, his eyes widened, and something like appreciation flickered across his face before his expression resumed its usual impassivity. "You look," he began, then seemed to reconsider his words. "The gown suits you." It was hardly effusive praise, but from him, it felt significant. "Thank you, Your Grace." "James," he said unexpectedly. "When we are alone, you may call me James." The simple concession warmed her more than it should have. "James," she repeated softly. They rode to Lady Harcourt's townhouse in silence, though Wilhelmina felt a new awareness between them. Occasionally, she caught him watching her, his gaze unreadable in the carriage's dim interior. The moment they entered the ballroom, the atmosphere shifted perceptibly. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. Whispers rustled like dry leaves across the polished floor. "The Black Duke," someone murmured, not quite softly enough. "I didn't think he'd show his face after the Pembroke affair." Wilhelmina felt her husband stiffen beside her, his hand tightening on her arm. "Remember," he said in a low voice, 1 hour. Lady Harcourt, a formidable dowager with shrewd eyes and an even sharper tongue, approached them immediately. "Wilhelmina, my dear. I could scarcely believe it when I heard you'd married the Duke of Greymont." Her gaze flicked to the Duke. "Your Grace. A surprise to see you in society." "Lady Harcourt," he replied with a curt nod. "My Duchess wished to attend." "Did she indeed?" The older woman's painted eyebrows rose. "How accommodating you've become. I recall a time when you were less tractable." James's jaw tightened. "If you'll excuse us." As they moved through the crowd, Wilhelmina became acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. Ladies hid behind fans, gentlemen paused in mid-conversation, and everywhere, eyes darted toward them then quickly away. "Why do they fear you so?" she asked quietly as James procured champagne for them. "Fear is preferable to contempt," he replied. "At least fear keeps them at a distance." Before she could probe further, a portly gentleman with florid cheeks approached them, swaying slightly from too much brandy. "Greymont," he called, too loudly. "Bold of you to show your face here after what you did to my Georgiana. The poor girl hasn't been the same since you ruined her prospects." James's expression turned dangerous. "Lord Bainbridge, you're drunk. Drunk enough to speak the truth." Bainbridge retorted. "You destroyed 3 families with your banking schemes, then had the gall to ruin my daughter's reputation with your accusations. Your daughter attempted to seduce my steward for information about my business affairs," James replied coldly. Any damage to her reputation was self-inflicted. Bainbridge's face purpled. "You blackguard! You'll pay for that's quite enough, Uncle Reginald." A tall, elegant woman appeared at Bainbridge's side, her golden beauty marred only by the calculation in her eyes. "You promised Aunt Helena no scenes tonight." She turned to James, her lips curving in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Your Grace. How unexpected to see you here." Her gaze shifted to Wilhelmina, assessing her with practiced precision. "And this must be your new acquisition. How charming." "Lady Georgiana," James acknowledged stiffly. "We were just leaving," Wilhelmina interjected, sensing the dangerous undercurrents. "It's been a pleasure." "Has it?" Lady Georgiana's laugh was brittle. "I wonder if you'll still find it pleasurable when you learn what manner of man you've married." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Ask him about Caroline. Ask him why his first Duchess really died." James's hand closed around Wilhelmina's arm, his grip like iron. "We're leaving. Now." The carriage ride home unfolded in charged silence. Wilhelmina could feel anger radiating from her husband in palpable waves, yet curiosity overcame her caution. "Who was Caroline?" she asked quietly. "I told you that subject is closed. These people clearly believe you responsible for her death. As your wife, I have a right to know if I've married what?" he snarled, turning on her with such ferocity that she shrank back against the carriage seat. "A murderer? Is that what you think?" "I don't know what to think," she replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "You've told me nothing." For a moment, she thought he might retreat back into icy silence. Instead, something seemed to break within him. "Caroline was barely 19 when we married," he said, his voice hollow. "Beautiful, accomplished, from an impeccable family. The perfect Duchess by all accounts. What no one knew was that she married me for my fortune while continuing her affair with Viscount Pembroke's son." Wilhelmina's breath caught. "She was unfaithful. Flagrantly so. When I discovered the affair, I confronted her. She laughed in my face, said no woman could ever love the Black Duke. That evening, she took her lover to my bed, while I was supposedly in Birmingham on business." His hands clenched into fists. "I returned early. Found them together." "What happened?" Wilhelmina whispered. "I ordered them both out of my house. Caroline was hysterical, screaming that I had ruined her life. She ran from the room, fell down the main staircase." His voice faltered. "Her neck broke. She died instantly." Wilhelmina covered her mouth with her hand. "Dear God! Pembroke's son fled that night. Spread the story that I had pushed her in a jealous rage. No one questioned it. Why would they? I've never been liked in society. My business methods are ruthless. It was easier to believe I was a murderer than admit the darling of the ton had betrayed her wedding vows." The carriage slowed as they approached Greymont House. James's face was half in shadow, half illuminated by passing street lamps, giving him a haunted appearance. "Now you know," he said flatly. "Judge me as you will, but remember, you are bound to me regardless." When they arrived home, he disappeared into the eastern wing without another word, leaving Wilhelmina alone with this newfound knowledge. She wandered to the library, needing the comfort of books and solitude to process what she had learned. The Duke, James, was not a murderer. But he was a man deeply wounded by betrayal, who had retreated behind walls of ice and intimidation rather than risk further pain. His coldness toward her, his insistence on a marriage of convenience, suddenly made perfect sense. He had tried love once and found it false. As dawn broke, Wilhelmina made her decision. She would not press him for affection he couldn't give, but neither would she live as a ghost in her own home. She would be the Duchess Greymont house needed, whether its master appreciated her efforts or not. Over the following weeks, subtle changes appeared throughout the house. Fresh flowers softened austere rooms. New curtains allowed more light into previously shadowed spaces. Meals became more varied, served at a properly set table rather than on trays. James noticed but said nothing, though occasionally Wilhelmina caught him observing her with puzzled interest, as if she were a complex equation he couldn't quite solve. One rainy afternoon, a letter arrived that changed everything. Charlotte had suffered a relapse of her consumption. The doctors feared the worst if she remained at Havenwood through the winter. Wilhelmina found James in his study, interrupting him mid-meeting with his solicitor. "I must speak with you immediately." To her surprise, he dismissed the other man without argument. "What's happened?" "It's Charlotte. She's ill again." Wilhelmina's voice trembled despite her efforts to remain composed. "The doctor recommends the sea air of Brighton for the winter, but she refuses to leave Havenwood without my permission, and I cannot leave London without yours." James studied her pale face. "You wish to go to her?" "Yes, but I understand if my duties as Duchess, family comes first," he interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "Make whatever arrangements are necessary. Take Mrs. Ellis with you. I shall join you when business permits." Wilhelmina stared at him in disbelief. "You would come to Brighton? But you detest society gatherings." "I detest seeing you distress more." The admission seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. He cleared his throat. "Besides, we have unfinished business. The matter of an heir." The blunt reminder of that aspect of their arrangement sent heat flooding Wilhelmina's cheeks. In 3 months of marriage, James had not once exercised his conjugal rights, though their interactions had gradually thawed from icy formality to something resembling cautious respect. "Thank you," she said softly. "I shall leave tomorrow." That evening, as Wilhelmina packed for Brighton, a knock sounded at her chamber door. She opened it to find James standing in the corridor, his expression uncharacteristically uncertain. "May I come in?" Surprised, she stepped aside. "Of course." He entered but remained near the doorway, his powerful frame seeming oddly hesitant in the feminine space of her bedchamber. "I brought you this." He extended his hand, revealing a small leather case. "For your journey." Inside lay an exquisite gold locket on a delicate chain. When opened, it contained a miniature portrait of Charlotte that Wilhelmina recognized from the gallery at Havenwood. "How did you?" "I had it commissioned when we married," he explained. "I thought you might want a remembrance of your sister." The simple thoughtfulness of the gesture moved her deeply. "Thank you, James. It's perfect." Their gazes held, and for a moment, Wilhelmina glimpsed something in his eyes that made her heart quicken. Then he bowed slightly. "Safe journey, Wilhelmina. I shall join you within the fortnight." True to his word, James arrived in Brighton 13 days later, taking rooms at the same seaside hotel where Wilhelmina had established Charlotte. His presence caused the expected stir among the winter residents, but he ignored the whispers, focusing instead on Wilhelmina's happiness at Charlotte's improving health. To Wilhelmina's astonishment, he proved surprisingly adept with her sister, his usual gruffness softening when Charlotte's strength failed her. He arranged for the finest physicians, procured books to entertain her during convalescence, and once, Wilhelmina caught him actually smiling at something Charlotte said, a genuine smile that transformed his severe features into something approaching handsome. "He's not what I expected," Charlotte confided one afternoon as they watched James walking along the shore, his tall figure stark against the grey winter sea. "The way he looks at you when you're not watching," He cares for you, Will. It's an arrangement, nothing more, Wilhelmina insisted, though her heart betrayed her with a leap at Charlotte's words. He needed a duchess. I needed security for us. Perhaps it began that way, Charlotte replied with the wisdom of her younger years. But I don't think that's all it is now. That evening, James joined Wilhelmina for dinner in her private sitting room after Charlotte had retired. The intimacy of the setting, with just the two of them before a crackling fire, created a different atmosphere than their formal meals in London. The sea air agrees with your sister, he observed, pouring her a glass of wine. Her color is much improved. Thanks to your generosity, Wilhelmina acknowledged. You've been unexpectedly kind. His eyebrow rose. Unexpectedly? You must admit, you cultivate a rather forbidding persona, she said, emboldened by the wine and the companionable mood. The fearsome Duke of Greymont, London's most ruthless businessman, who reduces grown men to stammering apologies with merely a look. To her surprise, a rueful smile touched his lips. A useful reputation in business circles. Less so in personal matters, perhaps. Why maintain it, then? Why let society believe the worst of you? James stared into the fire, his profile etched in gold and shadow. After Caroline's death, I discovered the value of being feared rather than liked. People keep their distance. They don't presume familiarity or attempt to use you for their own ends. It must be lonely, Wilhelmina said softly. His eyes met hers, and the vulnerability in them stole her breath. It was. Until recently. The air between them changed, charged with something Wilhelmina dared not name. James set aside his wine glass and moved to sit beside her on the small settee. I have not been a proper husband to you, he said, his voice low. Our arrangement was cold, businesslike. You deserve better. We agreed to terms, she reminded him, though her pulse quickened at his proximity. Terms can change. His hand covered hers, warm and strong. If both parties wish it. Wilhelmina's heart hammered against her ribs. What are you saying, James? I'm saying that I've watched you these past months. Your strength, your grace under pressure. How you've transformed my house into a home. How you've cared for your sister with such devotion. His voice roughened. I find myself wanting more than our original agreement. I want a true marriage, Wilhelmina. Before she could respond, shouts erupted from the corridor outside, followed by a thunderous pounding on their door. James was on his feet instantly, positioning himself between Wilhelmina and the door. Greymont, a slurred voice bellowed. Come out and face me, you murdering bastard! James's expression hardened. William Pembroke. It seems the coward has finally returned from the continent. He opened the door to reveal a disheveled young man, clearly drunk and supported by two equally intoxicated companions. The resemblance to Lady Georgiana was unmistakable, the same golden good looks, though marred by dissipation and fury. There he is. Pembroke snarled. The man who killed Caroline and ruined my life. Lower your voice, James commanded, his tone dangerously quiet. You're making a spectacle of yourself. As if you care for propriety. Pembroke spat. You drove her to her death because she loved me instead of you. Wilhelmina moved to stand beside her husband. Mr. Pembroke, you're drunk. This is neither the time nor place, and you, Pembroke rounded on her, his handsome face twisted with malice. Poor fool. Do you know what he did? He found us together and flew into a rage. Caroline ran, terrified, and he pursued her to the staircase. I heard her scream as she fell. I heard the sound of her, enough. James's voice cracked like a whip. You weren't there when she fell. You were halfway to Dover, saving your own skin while leaving her to face the consequences alone.
That's a lie.
Is it? Shall I call for the footman who saw you fleeing through the servants' entrance? Or perhaps the carriage driver you paid triple fare to take you to the coast that night? Pembroke's face drained of color. You can't prove, I can prove everything, including the debts you accumulated in gaming hells across London. Debts Caroline paid from her allowance because you threatened to abandon her if she didn't. James's contempt was palpable. You used her, bled her dry financially and emotionally, then left her to die alone. The corridor had filled with curious hotel guests, whispering behind raised hands as the confrontation unfolded. Wilhelmina saw the moment James noticed the audience, saw the shutters come down over his expression as he prepared once again to be cast as the villain. She couldn't bear it. Not again. Not after everything she now knew about the man behind the mask. Mr. Pembroke, she said clearly, her voice carrying to every spectator, my husband has shown remarkable restraint given the circumstances. The truth of Caroline's death is a matter between those present that night. But I know James Greymont to be an honorable man, one who has treated me with nothing but respect and care. She took James's arm, feeling the tension in him. I suggest you return when sober if you wish to discuss this further. For now, we bid you good night. With dignity, she drew James back into their rooms and closed the door on the murmuring crowd. For a long moment, he simply stared at her, an unreadable emotion in his eyes. Why did you do that? He finally asked. Defend me. Because it was right, she replied simply. And because I believe in you. Something broke in his carefully controlled expression. With a groan that seemed torn from his very soul, he pulled her to him, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that burned away every last vestige of coldness between them. Wilhelmina melted against him, her arms winding around his neck as years of loneliness and months of growing affection culminated in this moment of perfect connection. His lips were firm yet gentle, demanding yet giving, and when they finally parted, breathless and dazed, she knew with absolute certainty that their arrangement had evolved into something neither had anticipated. I think, she whispered against his mouth, that I should like that true marriage now. His answering smile transformed him completely. As would I, Duchess. As would I. That night, James claimed his bride properly for the first time, with a tenderness and passion that made Wilhelmina weep with the beauty of it. Afterward, cradled in his arms as the sea murmured beyond their windows, he confessed what she had already begun to suspect. I never intended to maintain our marriage as merely a business arrangement, he admitted, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. From the moment I first saw your portrait in your father's study, I was intrigued. When he approached me about settling his debts in exchange for your hand, I agreed not because I needed a duchess, but because I wanted you. You had seen me before our wedding. Wilhelmina lifted her head from his chest, surprised. Many times, though you never noticed me. At the opera 3 years ago. In Hyde Park the summer before last. At your cousin's wedding. His mouth curved wryly. I'm not a romantic man by nature, but something about you called to me. Your quiet dignity. Your devotion to your sister. The way you smiled when you thought no one was watching. Why the pretense of indifference, then? Why treat our marriage as a cold transaction? His expression sobered. Fear, he admitted. After Caroline, I couldn't bear the thought of making myself vulnerable again. Better to maintain distance, to keep you as a duchess rather than risk you as a wife. I convinced myself it was safer for us both. And now, she asked softly. His arms tightened around her. Now I find that loving you is worth any risk. 3 months later, as spring breathed new life into London, the Duke and Duchess of Greymont hosted their first formal dinner party. Society, initially hesitant to accept invitations from the Black Duke, found itself unable to resist the allure of seeing the reformed recluse and his mysterious bride. What they discovered astonished the ton. Greymont House, once a somber fortress, now shone with warmth and elegance. Its master, still formidable in business matters, displayed an unexpected tenderness toward his wife that silenced even the most determined gossips. Most surprising was the Duchess herself, confident, gracious, and visibly with child. The way the Duke's hand protectively covered hers whenever she touched her slightly rounded belly spoke volumes about their relationship. "They say he dotes on her," Lady Harcourt remarked to Lord Bainbridge during the musical entertainment that followed dinner. "That has established a charitable foundation in her name to support young women without means." "A remarkable transformation," Bainbridge agreed grudgingly. "Perhaps the man is not entirely the villain we believed." Across the room, oblivious to the chattering guests, James leaned down to whisper something in Wilhelmina's ear that made her laugh softly, her eyes shining with happiness. "Are you pleased with your evening, Duchess?" he asked, though the tender way he said her title now made it sound like an endearment. "Beyond measure," she replied, her hand finding his. "Though I confess, I look forward to when they've all gone home and I have you to myself again." His eyes darkened with promise. "As do I." Later that night, as moonlight silvered their bedchamber and the sounds of London faded into peaceful silence, Wilhelmina lay in her husband's arms, marveling at how completely her life had changed. She had married a stranger to save her family estate, expecting at best security and at worst misery. Instead, she had found something infinitely more precious, a partner who challenged her, respected her, and loved her with a depth that humbled her. "What are you thinking?" James murmured against her hair. Wilhelmina smiled, placing his hand over the spot where their child grew. "That sometimes the things we fear most are exactly what we need. That walls built to protect can become prisons if we're not careful. That love, real love, can heal even the deepest wounds." "Profound thoughts for the middle of the night," he teased gently. "I have a profound husband," she replied, turning in his arms to face him. "One who taught me that second chances are possible, even when all seems lost." His kiss was tender, reverent. "Not a second chance," he corrected softly. "A first true beginning." And in that moment, as London slept and the future stretched bright before them, the Duke and his Duchess found themselves exactly where they were meant to be, no longer strangers bound by circumstance, but partners united by a love neither had dared to imagine possible.